Um, and so, it was things like when I was really little, I remember I was in first grade and I had a friend who wanted me to have a sleepover. And I was told that I wasn't allowed to sleep over her house because she was probably going to die in Armageddon. And so it was a really intense fear based program. Um, my mom died when I was 12 years old after a long battle with cancer. And I was left with my dad, who was violent and abusive. But he did not drink. I mean, it wasn't that he didn't drink, but his drinking looked like, maybe a glass of scotch or something once every few months. So he wasn't an alcoholic, but he certainly had some alcoholic behaviors. And that was how the home life was. So um, I grew up in this cult. I hated the God that they preached about. And I tossed and turned for a long time with this concept. And at the age of 17, I decided to leave my family and leave the cult. Now, when I say I left the cult, you don't just leave cults, you have to run from them. And I ran from it. Um, I had, my father told me at that point that I would be dead, that I was dead to him. And no one in my family or circle of friends or anyone that I had any relationships with growing up was allowed to talk to me. And so when I say that I was alone in the world, I mean that to my core. And although I had sips of alcohol before that, it was when I left the cult that I found alcohol. And when I say I found it, what I found was that when I drank, I didn't have to feel the fears. I could numb out all of those fears, all the anxiety, the sadness, the loneliness. And so at that point in my professional drinking career, the alcohol was actually a solution to my problems. And I thought, this is great. Like anytime I just don't feel like dealing with something, I can just pour alcohol on it. And guess what? It goes away. So it was a real coping solution. And I think, from my experience, I lacked coping skills. So alcohol was a pretty good lubricant for coping. And so that was my solution for pretty much my entire 20s, in my 20s. And I was a heavy drinker, although I don't know if I would classify me at that time as alcoholic. I would just tell you that I was a heavy drinker. I partied and I was the party girl. And, that was my 20s. I got married and got pregnant and decided that that was the one thing that would keep me from drinking. I couldn't drink alcohol while I was pregnant. And so I quit. I didn't quit because I thought I had a problem with it. I just quit because I knew you weren't supposed to drink while pregnant. So I didn't. And then after I had my son, he was a challenging child. I think they all are. But bottom line is, I decided that I couldn't afford to drink, um, either financially or emotionally, that I needed to focus my attention on him. And so I didn't drink for 4 years. And again, it wasn't because I had like some big focus on sobriety. It was just that it just didn't seem to be a priority at that point, and it didn't quite fit in with things. So I didn't drink. Um, then my 30s came after my son was born. And about the time that he was 5, I started drinking again. And it wasn't like any, big thought that I had. I was having some marriage problems. I was stressed out by work and the kids. So, I picked up and I went to happy hours and I started drinking. And that this is where my alcohol progresses, right? Because I've had 5 years, four years under my belt of not drinking. Didn't think it was a problem to begin with. Now I'm drinking a lot more. I'm still not drinking every day. I'm drinking pretty much like evenings and weekends. Um, and at some point in my late 30s, I would say I reached what the big book calls the point of no return. It was the point where I couldn't solve any problems without alcohol because I couldn't get numb enough. And I was starting to feel as though I needed that drink every day. And so the disease had already progressed by this point in time, even though I had had, 4 years, quote unquote, dry. Um, so then my 40s came, and that's where my progressive disease really started to kick into high gear. In my 40s, my motto was, I don't drink till after 5. And I was very proud of that. I thought that because I didn't drink till after 5, I certainly wasn't an alcoholic. I mean, I'm not laying on the street somewhere, and I don't drink every day when I get up in the morning. So how can I be an alcoholic? But if you've ever seen the cartoon with Fred Flintstone, when he rolls out at 5 o'clock and he rolls down that dinosaur tail and he's got, like, his keys in his hand, I had a drink in my hand at 4:59 every day. If I wasn't on the way to drink, I had the drink in my hand and I set the day by it. I I could get through the hangover in the morning. I could get through the mid-afternoon craving, but at 5 o'clock, I was going to be drinking somewhere, somehow, some way. Um, and that progressed into, again, my disease is a progressive disease. That progressed into a glass of wine or two every night, but it was every single night. And then it progressed into a bottle of wine a night. And then, because, the wine industry is so innovative, I could buy a box of wine, pretty classy, I'd say. And I could, first of all, the garbage man wouldn't know how many bottles I drank because the box was much easier to hide than the bottles were. And they didn't clink and clink in the garbage can. And so I didn't have to worry about the embarrassment that the neighbors had when they heard my trash clinking. And the best part was I could hide boxes all over the house so that I always had more. I never had enough, but I always had more than what I planned on drinking that night. And that's when life started to become really unmanageable. And unmanageability kicked in, insanity kicked in on my 50th birthday cruise. And on that particular cruise, I have very few memories of that entire trip. I think we were on the cruise for 7 days. I can't honestly tell you, but I can tell you that I was pretty much blacked out the entire cruise. I was kicked out of the casino. I totally embarrassed my family in pretty much every venue on that ship. And by the time that we got off the ship and we were done with our trip, I think we had like 3 photos of the entire trip. And that is pretty much my memories of my 50th birthday, because I spent every waking moment drinking. That was where my disease had progressed to by that point. And so I started thinking that this was a pretty big problem, and I sought a lot of different type of help over the years. It wasn't just when I was 50. I sought help from the time I was in my mid 40s. And that looked like hypnotist, therapist, self-help books, Women for Sobriety, Smart Recovery, an IOP program. I mean, it wasn't for a lack of trying, but I did everything that anyone recommended to quit drinking. I bought books. I bought so many books. I bought books on how to quit drinking. And the best title that I look back now on was How to Quit Drinking One Drink at a Time. Like, the fact that the insaneness of that thought in and of itself. None of these things worked. I couldn't get more than maybe a week, 10 days under my belt, maybe 2 weeks, but that was the max. And I always rewarded my sobriety, my week or 2 weeks, with a drink. Like, oh, I've been sober for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. I'm going to go out and have a drink. And one drink was never enough. One drink was never enough. And I always ended up dumbfounded at how I ended up completely blacked out and drunk. But I did every time. And the disease progressed even further because, like I said, I used to have a glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine, then it was a bottle of wine, maybe 2 bottles of wine. But what happened is my body stopped processing the wine. So I could get completely blacked out, stupid drunk towards the end off just one single glass. One glass, and it was already going to my brain. Like I was already blacked out and completely incapable of functioning. So there was a lot of stages of progression to my illness. Um, I did not have, there's, I can't tell you the miracle that occurred, but I didn't have DUIs. I didn't have jail time. I didn't have stints in, institutions. I don't know why, because I belonged in all of those places. And I did all of the things that people do to get in those places. But for some reason, I didn't have any of those consequences. But I did have a lot of health consequences. So again, think about drinking, I don't know, 2 to 4 bottles a night of wine. Think about what that does to you. So for me, what happened is because I was blacked out all the time, I would wake up with broken bones. I had a broken rib one time that I woke up with. No idea how it happened. I had a broken foot one time that I woke up with. Have no clue how it happened. I punched my husband in the face one time. Don't have any knowledge of that. The only way that I even knew that happened was he was mad at me the next day. And I was like, why are you mad at me? And he's like, because you punched me in the face. I had no idea that I had done that. I'm generally not an angry person. But in a fit of blackout, alcoholic rage, I guess that's what I do. I traveled for work at that time and I was blacked out in hotel bars. You know, I hope and I pray that nothing bad ever happened to me, but if it did, I wouldn't have even known. Um, so again, no legal consequences, but a lot of other types of consequences associated with my alcoholic drinking. Medically, I had to go to the doctor for what they finally determined was I was deteriorating the inside lining of my esophagus because the wine couldn't be tolerated by my body. And then, vomiting and whatever else was going on. I had a blood disorder. It was a disorder for as long as I drank. The moment I stopped drinking, I had no longer had that disorder. So the doctor said, you really just need to stop drinking. But, that didn't stop me either. I had a lot of digestive disorders. So the health issues should have really, given me a little bit of a wake up call, but that's not how my disease worked. So at the suggestion of one of my therapists, I came to an AA meeting probably about 7 years before I actually got sober. And she said, I just want you to go to 3 meetings. And I said, okay. So I picked out 3 meetings and I went to 3 different meetings. Now, I tell this portion of the story not because it helped me get sober. I tell it because there's a very important lesson for me in the traditions of our program. So at the first meeting, all I heard, and this is me, all I heard was God, 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 God. And given my background and the cult and all of that stuff, that was absolutely going to cancel that one. Like, not going to go back to that meeting. At the second meeting, all I heard was people talking about other addictions. And, I think it's an important thing for me in AA to hear about my disease. We all have, any sort of addiction is a similar disease, but I needed to hear about alcohol. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous gave me. But that second meeting, that's not what I heard. And so I discounted and disqualified that meeting. And then at the third meeting, I was 13 stepped and politely told the gentleman that approached me that, I was married, I had a husband, no thank you. And so that was my first 3 meetings and it turned me off. And I went back to my therapist and I said, I'm not going back there. Here's what happened. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I said, whatever, like, that's not for me. I'm not doing that. So I stayed out for another 5 years, exploring all these other options. And not one of them could get me sober. Not one of them could get me anywhere close to sober. So I continued to go to SMART recovery meetings. but I just was not finding what I needed there. I was going because some of these people were sober, but I just didn't understand how they got sober. I just didn't grasp onto that the particular program. And amazingly, I when I went to one of these meetings, I was in tears and I just shared with them that I don't know how to stop drinking. I've been trying, I've been doing all these things. And this woman came up to me after the meeting and she said, "Honey, you need to go to AA." And I said, "AA? I'm not going to AA. That's why I'm in smart recovery." And she said, "Look, smart recovery works for some of us, but it sounds like you need AA. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a meeting and you need to go to this particular meeting and sit your butt in a chair and see what you think." And so the gift of desperation is what got me to that meeting. I had a lot of prejudgments going in, but I said, you know what, at this point, like, I don't know, I'll just go and try it out. There's a woman at that meeting who walked up to me, introduced herself. She said, "My name is Jan. Would you like to sit with me?" And I instantly felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And I tell that part of the story because to me, greeting the newcomer is the most important thing I can do in this program. If she had not done that, I don't know if I had to come back. I don't know if I would have stayed. I don't know. But I can tell you that every year on my anniversary, I call her. I don't see her. We're not friends outside of the rooms or whatever. I don't see her, but I call her every year on my anniversary to thank her for how she welcomed me and made me feel like I belonged there. And when I sat down in that chair next to her, I started crying. And I started crying for probably the next 30 to 45 days because I had grown up in this environment where you stuff your feelings, you don't talk about your feelings. And I had, 40, 50 years worth of stuffing. And when I started listening and sitting in those rooms of AA and hearing you people tell your story, it started to really make sense to me. Like I related to what you were talking about. And yeah, some of the people I heard have been in jail or had drank much worse than me or been homeless. Like it didn't matter if they were better, worse, had a higher bottom, lower bottom. Like I related to how you drank and I related to how you found a solution. And that kept me coming back. Friend of mine says that um, I think the way he says it is my story brought me to these rooms. Your stories keep me coming back. And I love that because that is the truth for me. And, a lot of people say, well, how did you get over to the God thing? Well, let me tell you, it wasn't easy. Remember, I had this big God complex problem. And my sponsor said to me, okay, don't worry so much at this moment about, visualizing your God. Just start with believing that I believe. Do you believe that I believe in God? And I said, yeah. And she's like, okay, just start there. And just for now, just let me give you a few prayers to say. And even though you're not necessarily feeling it or feeling the connection, just start with these prayers. And that's how it started. The third step prayer, the seventh step prayer. Those are the prayers that I started with. Even though I was saying them and really thinking to myself, I feel really dumb right now, I would still say those prayers. And at some point, like a light switch happened where when I said those prayers, I actually started to relate to a higher power that I felt like I was praying to that higher power. And after that first meeting, I found a sponsor. I did the 90 and 90 meetings. I started working the steps and I just prayed for willingness. I just prayed for surrender. And I just did whatever my sponsor told me to. I'm kidding you not. If she had told me to go in the street and stand on my head, I would have done it because I knew what she had and I knew her background and her story. And I thought, if she can do this, then by God, I'm going to do this. And self-reliance carried me all through my life. It got me out of that cult. It got me a career. Self-reliance was my pride and joy. Like if anybody can do it, Suz can. But when I came in the rooms, I started to realize that this is one thing that self-reliance had never fixed for me. Self-reliance didn't cut it. And so I had to start learning how to turn it over and have God reliance. And today self-reliance is still a big character defect of mine. I mean, I practiced that one for 40 years. So it's not like it's just vanishing into the atmosphere. But when I catch myself in Suz reliance instead of God reliance, I catch myself. That's the beauty of it. I catch myself now and I can go, you know what, God, your will, not mine. And part of the prayers that I pray every day, like I have a routine now. And that routine's really important to my sobriety because I'm a creature of habit. I like to have a routine. And so the first thing in the morning when sometimes before I open my eyes, and certainly as soon as I open my eyes, I pray, God, please guide my thoughts, words, and actions today that they may be aligned with your will for me. And I pray the third step prayer. And if I find myself like halfway through the day, I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to pray. And I feel like all discombobulated. But it's that routine that keeps me steady. I get on an 8 a.m. Zoom every day. My face is not usually on that because I'm usually already like either exercising or walking my dogs or sometimes even already starting work. But my ears are on that Zoom so that I can hear what I need to hear. And I do a lot of service work. I sponsor other women. And I was always taught that on the back of every coin is the AA logo. And that triangle has three things on it: unity, service, recovery. And if I'm feeling itchy, if I'm feeling like just not myself, I have to reflect, okay, what does my triangle look like? Unity, service, recovery. Unity, what's my network look like? How many meetings am I going to? Service, how am I volunteering to help another alcoholic? And recovery is probably the most important sometimes because I've learned in these rooms that you're either working on recovery or you're working on a relapse. There's no middle ground. And so I have to constantly be trying to improve myself or grow. And, sometimes that's ugly. Sometimes that's not easy. I can tell you from personal experience that, life has not always been, daisies in recovery. Life happens. But today I've learned how to deal with that without taking a drink of alcohol, but most importantly, without becoming completely insane. I was addicted to chaos and drama. If there wasn't something chaotic or dramatic happening around me, I was looking around to start something. And I was addicted to being a fixer. If anybody who needed fixing got anywhere within arm's reach of me, I was going to fix them. I was going to help them. I was going to do something. And that was a very codependent kind of behavior that I had there. So today, what it looks like is, I've learned a lot of lessons in this program. When I came in, I was financially and emotionally bankrupt. I was robbing Peter to pay Paul. Today I have a house. I have a husband that loves me and supports me. And, we've had to work through issues together. I've had to work through issues alone. But I would have never even had the capability to work on that relationship without the tools of this program and without my sponsor and a good network. A matter of fact, I can tell you, I would have left. Year one, I was like, I can't do this. He's ridiculous. He's too difficult. I'm just going to leave because the way I dealt with most problems is F it. I'm just getting out of here. But today, like I sit in the uncomfortable periods because what my sponsor taught me and what I found to be absolutely 100% true is that every time I'm uncomfortable, every time that I experience pain, it's a growth spurt. Because on the other side, if I sit in it, if I work through it, if I try to get a tool to help me the next time it happens, on the other side is always, always, always beautiful growth and usually a really good lesson learned. So the other things that I've learned and utilize today, um, is that a problem shared is halved. You know, self-reliance taught me can't depend on anybody but Suze. God reliance teaches me to depend on God and you people. And I've never been proved wrong by that. In the last 4 years, I've learned more than I learned in the previous 40 to 50 years. And their life skills, their relationship skills. One of my friends in the program says, and this was such a prolific thing he said, but he said, people do not do things to you. People just do things. And I lived my whole life believing that the world was against me, that people were out to get me. And today I don't have to look at it like that. As a matter of fact, I can actually usually find like a place of serenity and solitude in those moments. And there are situations where people have perhaps wronged me. That's going to happen. And even with my father, after all these years, we made amends. And for the last roughly 8 years, I participate in helping care for him because he has dementia. And I found a place of compassion for him. I realized that he was a very sick individual. He didn't have the life tools to teach me. So where was he gonna go for the problems he had? And he didn't have alcohol either, guys. He was just out there on a limb. And hey, you know what? I just found a place of compassion. And I do believe that when you send another person unconditional love, it's really challenging to have hate or resentment in your heart. It's always worked for me. Even when I can't stand what the other person has done or who they are, or I don't agree with them, in my mind, I just go, you know what? Please send them unconditional love. And when I do that, I'm in a better place. And hey, maybe my higher power works in their life too, or maybe they've got their own higher power. But the bottom line is, it makes me happy and sane. And I need to stay happy and sane. And this program helps me do that. Um, when my son went off to school, my drinking was so bad that he turned to me one day before he went back to college and said, "You know what, Mom? I'm afraid one of these times I'm going to come home and you're going to be dead." And I looked at him in the eyes and I said, "I know." Not, "Oh, no, that would never happen. Oh, no, I'll quit drinking." Like, I just said, "I know." Like, I had come to accept what my disease had done to me. And I had no response to my son, who realized how far down the road I was. But you know what? Today I got a great relationship with my son. And I believe, especially for the parents in this program, that the best gift you can give your children is to show them there's a solution. Because at some point, either through genetics or through friendships, they're going to encounter the disease of alcoholism. My son shows no signs of it. I'm grateful for that. But guess what? He's encountered people with alcoholism in his circle of friends, and he's been able to help them by telling them, "My mom went to AA. You should try AA." Like, what is a better gift that you can give your child than to show them that this program works and that there is a solution and there's a place to go? And today we have a wonderful relationship, and I can't be more grateful than that, considering that his entire teenage years he grew up with an alcoholic mom. That's a gift and promise of this program. Um, So I think, where are we at with time? We're getting pretty close on time. So that's pretty much the end of my story. Life is good today. I'm glad to be sober today. Final thought, quitting drinking. I came in here to quit drinking. I thought that was the miracle of the program. Oh my God, the obsession's lifted and I quit drinking. What I found is that the miracle of this program is that I get to start living. And I have been able to find a life truly, truly better than I could have imagined.